Welcome to ISO 45001 in 45 minutes, where we unpack Clause 9 entitled Performance Evaluation. Hi, and welcome to ISO 45001 in 45 minutes. In this session, Clause 9, we're going to be looking at OHS Performance Evaluation. Clause 9 is really one of my favorite clauses in ISO 45001. It's the culmination of so much of the work that you've put in so far, from identifying your internal and external issues, to your leadership, to your planning and your risk assessment, to your support and your competency training and awareness, and then your operational controls. Here's where you get to assess the effectiveness of all the work that you've done to date. So in Clause 9.1, OHS Performance Monitoring, Measuring, Analysis, and Evaluation. A process is required for evaluating OHS performance, including methods, criteria to ensure results. In other words, you need to determine the what, when, how, who of your monitoring and measuring. And please remember that we need to look at both leading and lagging indicators. And what I mean by that is you need to look at indicators before loss occurs, such as your audits and inspections, and you need to look at lagging indicators, which is after losses occurred, after an incident, such as your incident and accident statistics. So you need to look at leading and lagging indicators as well as qualitative and quantitative. Qualitative, things like suggestion schemes and things that are based on human opinion, and rather than qualitative stats, quantitative stats and data. So some of the things that you need to identify in your monitoring and measuring analysis and evaluation is going to be, have you met your legal requirements? Because remember, that's one of the commitments that you've made in your occupational health and safety policy. Also, activities and operations relative to hazards and risks. So remember, in Clause 6, you identified your hazards, risks, your risk assessments, and then your controls. You've implemented those controls in Clause 8. Now you're assessing the effectiveness of the applied hierarchy of controls in managing those hazards and risks to ensure, again, that you meet the commitments made in your OHS policy, the commitments to prevent injury and ill health and to provide and maintain a safe working environment. You also need to assess progress towards objectives. So how are you progressing? If you've set an objective to reduce your accident stats or to improve your audit scores, how are you progressing against those objectives? You need to determine OHS performance, so your qualitative, quantitative data, and then also the effectiveness of your OHS management system as well. Is the system working for you? Also under Clause 9.1, we need to consider those monitoring and measuring devices or equipment that are used for occupational health and safety, whether it be a decibel meter or something for measuring thermal stresses. You need to ensure that those equipment are identified, they're protected, they are calibrated and verified. So also still in Clause 9.1, we look at Clause 9.1.2, which is entitled the Evaluation of Compliance. Now, I've put this on this slide because I always like to integrate evaluation of compliance with my internal auditing program, so my audits and my inspections. So in Clause 9.1.2, Evaluation of Compliance, we need a process for evaluating compliance to legal and other requirements. So remember, in Clause 6, we've identified the applicable legal and other requirements. Here in Clause 9.1.2, we need to check that we are, in fact, meeting those legal requirements. And again, to reiterate, it's because of the commitment that we've made in our health and safety policy. So we need to look at the frequency and method. So are we using weekly, monthly inspections as an evaluation of compliance? Because you can just as easily use an inspection checklist for checking specific areas of compliance, or all the way up to a full legal audit. So evaluate compliance and take action. So if you identify conformity or non-conformity or compliance or non-compliance, you need to take action to rectify that, again, to meet your OHS policy commitments. You need to maintain knowledge of compliance status and retain records of the evaluations of compliance. So your checklists and your audits and your legal audits, etc., are required as evidence. So moving on into Clause 9.2, internal auditing. You need to perform internal audits to confirm the following. So does your OHS management system that you've developed, does it conform to the requirements of ISO 45001? If 45001, let's say Clause 5.2, requires that you have a health and safety policy with certain commitments, you need to audit your OHS management system to ensure that it continually conforms to the requirements of the standard. Also, you need to confirm if your organization conforms to its own arrangements. So as an example, if you've put in your own policies and procedures that you will update your risk assessment on a weekly basis, that may not be a legal requirement, that may be something that your own organization ascribes to, then you need to ensure that you conform to your own arrangements. The organization shall establish an audit program. Now, the audit program will be based on ISO 19011, and that, remember that the audit program is the framework for all of your audits, and that will establish the frequency, the methods, the criteria, the auditors, and the competency. Audit results are reported to workers and interested parties. So once the audits are completed, how are you going to communicate those results to the various different parties in the organization? You're also required to take action to address audit findings. So where you're finding areas of conformance or non-conformance, you need to put in an action plan. Now, again, that should trigger your change management. It could trigger your improvement process for investigating, identifying root causes, and then creating a corrective action plan to prevent recurrence of those issues. And again, you need to retain records of all of this. So now, moving over into clause 9.3, which is entitled Management Review. Again, one of my favorite clauses. Again, the culmination of your system, all of your hard work, your analysis of data, your internal audits, etc. You're pulling through into an effective presentation to take your senior management team and your workers through the effectiveness of your OHS management system. So in clause 9.3, you're required to have a process to review your OHS management system at planned intervals. So you don't know, remember, a process doesn't necessarily have to be documented, but you need to review your system. Now let's have a look at some of the inputs to the management review. You need to look at the status of actions from previous minutes. You need to look at changes to your internal and external issues which could affect your context. You need to assess if there have been any changes to the needs and expectations of interested parties and workers. What about legal and other requirements? Have there been any changes with regards to the law since your previous management review? What about your OHS policy and your OHS objectives? Have those commitments in fact been met? Your risks and opportunities. Now, in clause 6, you're going to identify risks and opportunities, whether it be at a strategic level or at an operational level, whether it's related to hazards and risks or the management system. You will have also developed action plans to leverage those opportunities or to mitigate those risks further. You need to give feedback in terms of the effectiveness of those action plans. What is the status? How well are you progressing against those action plans? You also need to look at OHS performance indicators. Here you'll get feedback on all of those leading and lagging indicators, those qualitative and quantitative measurements. You need to look at monitoring and measuring and the evaluation of compliance and your audits and your communication consultation and participation and the effectiveness thereof. You also need to look at resources. Now, remember, we're looking at human, financial, equipment, all of that stuff that you need to effectively run your health and safety management system. Understanding the adequacy of those resources and input to the management review. Also, opportunities to improve your management system. Where are you? What is the status of those opportunities? So those are all of the inputs. And I like to put all of those inputs into a visual presentation that we can take senior management, interested parties, and workers through at the management review. Then obviously, by virtue of the presentation that you've done to everybody, they're then going to give some directives with regards to how you can improve the management system, and those are management review outputs. These, again, can be recorded in your management review minutes. So things that you need to record in your minutes would be decisions on continued suitability, adequacy, and effectiveness of your OHS management system, continual improvement opportunities, changes to the OHS management system, resources, any actions, and effect on the strategic direction. So again, here's where we're looking at clause 9 and an overview of clause 9, performance monitoring, measuring, analysis, and improvement, your internal audits, your management reviews, what should be the inputs to your process and what some of the outputs to that particular process can be. So there you have it, ladies and gents, an overview of clause 9 entitled OHS Performance Evaluation.